Hello, Mark and Matt. How are you doing?
Hello, how are you?
Very well, thank you. How are you?
Good, thank you. Saving the best till last.
Exactly. That's how it always is. If you can hear me clearly, I can hear you clearly. You are more than welcome to start your presentation, please.
Fantastic. So just as a little introduction, my name's Mark Russell. I predominantly look after the UK sales of Aurora Projects. Aurora Projects is a lighting supplier in the UK, and together we partner up with companies like Eaton, Tridonic, and in this instance, Holders and Casambi to deliver lighting projects across the UK. Next slide. So just a little bit of history about the project. Aurora attend a lot of these trade shows every year. And the one thing that I always take away from these trade shows is the amount of opportunity out there in the UK market still, where people have still got facilities, where people have still got offices, where they're still using old technology for their lighting. And not just old technology, it could be back in the day of T5 and T8 lamps, or even LEDs from 10 years ago. And where they've got the old technology, some of these people still don't even have controllability within their buildings. So they don't even have PIRs, they don't have absence, they don't have presence. So they're in their buildings with old technology with the lights on 100% of the time. And it shocks me the amount of opportunity there is in the UK for better lit environments, for better efficiencies to be put across these buildings in the UK. But not only that, we sometimes speak to people within these buildings who have actually invested in new lighting, but they've not spent that extra 10 or 15% to put the controllability and the functionality in there to actually dim their fittings and only have the light on when it's required in the required spaces. And for me, this is one of the main topics of today, because this is where Casambi and Holders and Aurora come into their own. Because as everyone knows, being able to retrofit a building, being able to refurb a building with controls isn't simple. Whereas with Bluetooth controllability using the Casambi product with Holders to commission and install, it makes the project very easy to upgrade the project, to retrofit the project. And with the carbon neutral, carbon zero story being such a big story for everyone, I think moving forward, that's something that people are going to be looking at. How can I reuse the lighting within my building just now, but make it better, not only for my finance director for the builds, but also for the people that work within the building, and how can I use my space better? And I think Bluetooth controllability and Casambi has that. Next slide, please. So we met this client at one of these trade fairs, and it's quite exciting when you meet an end user who's actually the private owner of a company. So this company was cash positive. They had no issues at all. They had purchased a brand new facility that had no lighting in it, but as you can see from the images, it had lots of daylight coming into the space. And effectively, they were wanting us to light this space, and they were wanting to move in the facility within the next 4 to 6 weeks. Fortunate for us, we ended up getting 3 months to do this. But the main driver for them moving ahead with this project with us was the fact that they were looking for one person to do the whole project. They were looking for one company to come in, do the site survey, do the design, do the quotation, supply light fittings, install the light fittings, commission them with the intelligence and the analytics, and in the end, they also ended up going for the finance option as well. So not a lot of companies could offer the full package. And this, again, is part of our strength. In the partnership with Casambi and with Holders, we can do this. We can work together and we bring all our strengths together. Now, the main reason for the analytics was they're an intelligent company, they're a smart business, and they wanted to know how their building was working. So they had 3 core points that they wanted us to meet. And that was the energy usage within the building. They wanted to be able to see that, maintain that, improve it where required. Obviously, they were wanting to control the daylight. Why have the lights on when the lights don't need to be on? And again, it was all about asset tracking. It was understanding their business. If their forklift is always going to the back right corner of the racking to pick the product, then it'll move the product to the forward space. So again, it was about utilising the lighting to build in that intelligence to understand how their building actually works. And on top of that, they were wanting to future-proof because they might actually have more facilities in the future in the UK where they want to introduce this, and they want to be able to see all the analytics for all the buildings on one app, on one phone, effectively, so that they can see how all their facilities are working. So we had 3 months, and between us, we managed to do this. So the solution was on the next slide. So we put forward 2 solutions. And Aurora, what Aurora's always been very good at is having a good product strategy tied in with the application strategy. So Aurora's always been very strong in lighting retail, and it's always been very strong in lighting industry. And effectively, you've got very similar lighting products. They might be at different heights, therefore there might be a different lumen output for the strength of light required, but it's all about putting light where it's needed, which is on the verticals in this instance, not on the horizontals. So it's all about uniformity across the verticals so that people can see what's on the shelves, so that people can see what's on the racking, and it helps with speed and efficiencies. In this instance, the client chose the K-On Plus, which is a more traditional high bay solution rather than the linear solution. And where Aurora could provide the lighting, Casambi could provide all the intelligence required, and then Holders could then provide the commissioning and the analytics package. So as a partnership, together we're stronger, and we were able to give the client all the required functionality without any of the complexity. And I think that's probably the key thing for me now. In the years that I've sold controls, everyone's always wanted the functionality. Everyone sees the benefits, but it's always been very complicated. Old solutions are very complicated. They're very heavy. They're in the infrastructure of the building. Bluetooth's very sustainable. It's very simple. All the intelligence is in the light fitting, and it all goes straight to an app. And it's very intuitive for the user, so it's user-friendly. So just to talk a wee bit more about that in detail, and to show you some of the analytics that we were working with the client, that we're still working with the client, I'll pass you over to Matt.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you for setting the scene regards the data there. So, yeah, just to introduce myself, I'm Matthew Hanson, Business Development Director at Holders Technology, and we're a Casambi across a number of countries. But also we're a technology provider ourselves. We've really developed solutions that work around Casambi and around the API from Casambi. And this is what Aurora and GEE used in this particular project. So, I mean, obviously there's been a number of sessions today that have related to data and to integration. This particular project, I think, as you could see from the pictures from Mark, was a new build. There was no existing systems that we needed to integrate into, but of course the customer had set out what it was that he was looking for in terms of energy monitoring, in terms of lighting control, and in terms of understanding how the space was being used. So I guess the question was, how did we achieve this by using just Casambi as the kind of base for that data? So the first thing that obviously Aurora did was supply the lighting controls within the luminaires, so the Aurora luminaires with Casambi lighting controls into the space. But of course, Casambi itself doesn't create that data that the customer needs. And so the question is, where do we get the information from? So if you can just click, please. And of course, rather helpfully, there's quite a lot of nice standards that we can use where we can source the data for the client. And in this instance, we're using drivers with that were D4i drivers, so they had the extended DALI data in there. Of course, that can also be found in a number of DALI 2 drivers. And I think, as was mentioned in the panel earlier, things like the LUM data from Tridonic drivers, there's various other proprietary data sets which can report into Casambi and which we can then utilize for the customer. If you could just click again, please. So what do we do with that data? Obviously, we've got to create the data in the drivers. The Casambi network is there to pull that data through. And then what we have to do is take that raw information and really turn it into something useful for the customer. And that's where Holders Analytics comes in. So you see in this instance, there is no BMS. There's no other system that we're plugging into. It's just Casambi with a plugin for it. And then one more click, please. And of course, yeah, one of the most important parts of the infrastructure is getting the data out. And if you can click again for me, please. So you can see here that what we're able to do is create the data in the devices, pull it through into the mesh, and then using the gateway devices, we can pull that data into the cloud. And that's where, using Casambi's API, we can present that back to the customer in a usable format, giving them indicative information, giving them empirical information that they can make decisions quantitative decisions on good information, rather than just putting a finger in the air and thinking, well, if I do this, I'm going to make a saving. You go to the next slide, please. So yeah, so what can we do with that data? What sort of information can we give them? So the first really that was touched on was about the asset tracking, I think Mark called it. Really, space utilization is what I like to think about. And this is where they moved into the space very quickly, as Mark said, a 3-month time frame for us to get this installed. And actually, I remember when we started doing the project, I think before the lighting even went in, there was already goods in the warehouse. So they were really desperate to get everything done in a short time frame. So you can imagine that when they put the goods onto the shelves, it could be quite ad hoc and random. And so we've kind of modeled quite a lot of the data for you here that we're going to show. And so here you can see maybe the heat map for the movement around the racking aisles in the warehouse before it's optimized. So we're going to have lots of goods that are in demand that are at the back of the warehouse. You know, maybe goods, maybe when the forklifts have to go and pick the stock, they're going to multiple aisles. And that, of course, gives us this very patchy heat map that we're looking at here. If you could click again, please. And as Mark mentioned, the idea is that we want to minimize the picking routes. We want to make it so that when an order has to be processed, that they're able to go the shortest distance, get the goods, bring them to the front. This is not just about making the actual dispatch process efficient, but of course, if we think about the lighting, each of these luminaires has a sensor on it. And if we can avoid sending people to the back of the aisles, we'll avoid turning all of the lights on. So again, this is going to have a knock-on consequence for energy consumption as well. If you can go to the next slide, please. So this is some of the pre-install data that we collected was to do with the light levels in the space. So again, this has all come through the Casambi API, and we're monitoring the lux levels in the space with the lights just on 100%, which is what they were on day one, and of course is what you would expect to see in many warehouse applications without lighting controls. Once the controls were in, of course, once we optimize the layout and we minimize the number of times the luminaires need to be turned on, we start to take into account things like the daylight as well, we can actually see that the average lux levels are going to come down because we're using the lights less. And if you go to the next slide, please. And you'll see also, of course, then the consequence of both of these factors. We have a baseline in the background, the pale blue columns, which show the energy consumption from day one. And then, of course, once we implement these changes in the dark blue columns, you can see where the energy consumption is reduced. In particular, as the day gets towards the middle of the day, brighter sunshine outside, we're using more light, more natural light, and so we can reduce the amount of artificial light. And of course, as a result, we're going to see a reduction in energy consumption on the lighting load. If you can go to the next slide. One of the things that Mark didn't mention, but which we also needed from the customer, was to future-proof the system for scalability. So this is just one warehouse, but of course, across the client's entire estate, there's multiple sites. And what the client doesn't want to have to do is to go to each individual site to analyze the information, understand how the site's working, or even be able to demonstrate from one site to the next, compare and copy across best practice. So using our platform, we can actually take multi-site data from as many networks globally as the client might own, and we can bring those into a single dashboard. And you can see here, this is actually a capture not from this particular client's dashboard, but from our next generation dashboard, which will be launching in June, showing a project with multiple sites. This is actually looking at wireless emergency. It's looking at emergency data instead. But it's exactly the same dashboard. And this is available to the client as well, so that they can then roll this out, scale it across their entire estate. I think if you'd like to go to the next slide. And I can hand back to Mark.
Thanks for that, Matt. I didn't realise I forgot to speak about the scalability, so apologies for that. But for me, this project was successful. You can see the client's got a forklift there. That was with the enabler of using the finance, which freed up some money for him to go out and spend other money on other things. And for me, the quote sums it up perfect. Andy is the owner of the company, and Ricky is the general manager. And you can see there it says the lights look epic. Andy dims them from his watch at least 5 times a day. And then, of course, by using the finance offer, they were able to retain money in the business to spend elsewhere. Or at the moment, of course, cash is king, maybe just keep it in the bank. But the project was super successful. And with the willingness, with the speed, with the agility that Casambi, Holders, Aurora all practice, we were able to turn this around and deliver the project from nothing to complete within 3 months. And now, of course, we're still working on the project, because with any project that has controls, the user, the client always has that initial brief that they want it to work towards. And then once the building's actually in practice, of course, we go back in and we change things, we tweak things, we maneuver things. And I think it's been a really successful show at how a project in industry can use Bluetooth technology, it can use the analytics, and it can, as Matt said, 100% start to make decisions for their business based on facts and figures rather than just based on feelings. And it allows them to have that intelligence within the light fittings to do that. So super successful project. I think working with partners brings these things all together. It makes us all stronger. And I suppose it only leaves us now to open it up. We've got 3 minutes left. If anyone's got any queries, if anyone's got any questions, feel free to fire away.